Alright guys, welcome back to episode 3 of creating a 2D game engine in Java. Last episode we worked on getting our game thread up and running properly so we can properly handle timing our frames and make sure we can enforce our frame cap each second. But now we're still going to go back to our game engine and we're going to keep working on this for one more episode after this one as well. And in this episode we're going to focus on adding some debugging features to our game because that's going to be a really important part of actually programming our game and tracking performance as we start the development process. So right now we've got our frame cap already established, but we have no idea if we're actually hitting that frame cap each second. We have no way to verify that. So that's what we're going to do now. In order to do that, we basically need to know when a second passes, and then we need to keep track of how many frames are processed in that time frame. So when we come down here, we'll do the same thing we did with the previous time, the cycle time and time passed, except we're going to make all that stuff separate for our second counter. So we'll do long, and we'll do previous second, which is going to be equal to just previous time right now, because it's going to be the same exact time as previous time, nothing else has changed. And then we're going to create one more counter, and then we call this one frames, and that's going to be the number of frames we calculate each second, of course. And so frames, we're going to only increment frames when we know completed steps 1 and 2, because the waiting we know is part of the idle time, and that timing step isn't as important to when that happens. But the two things that denote us processing a frame will be steps 1 and 2, which is running and updating our game logic, and also rendering to the screen. And so in the case of our engine, we're going to run the logic update first, and then the render update happens second. So once we complete the render update, we know we've finished calculating our game frame. So that's when we'll increment our frame count. And then so after we know we've done both steps, that means we can go ahead and we can now check to see if a second has passed, and we can see what our frame rate is. And so we'll say, let's go ahead, we need to go up here and we need to go ahead and track what we're tracking. So we got our current time now. We need to see if a second passed, and so we'll just subtract the previous second from our current time. We already had current time defined up here. And if that is equal to 1 second, and we're counting, remember, in nanoseconds, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and that means a second has passed. Actually, greater than or equal to. That means a second has passed, and if that has happened, we want to then go ahead and reset our frame counter back equal to 0, because we've now hit that point, and we also want to update previous second. And we also want to update previous second and set that equal to our current time. But now we need some way for, other than our game engine, to still be able to get that number of what the frame rate is. And so we need to keep this number updated every time we get a new statistic. So that way we can have that number, say, put out in our game window so we can see what the frame rate is, or we can have it be accessed outside by some other program. So we're going to come back up to our game class at the top, and we're going to make another variable. We're going to call this the frame rate. So that's going to be a current FPS. By default, go ahead and set frame rate equal to 0. Actually, what I really should, well, kind of set 0, and what we'll do is when the game does run in our thread, we will also go ahead and set the frame rate equal to 0 in case we restart our game. So frame rate will set to 0 there as well. So really what we should do, I feel like we should make a separate method here, and we'll call this init. And so when our game starts, we should have a separate method that will, before the game actually starts running, that's going to go ahead and set up anything that needs to be set up. So we'll go ahead and do this a little bit of initialization of our engine before the game actually runs. And that's where we'll set frame rate. So we'll just reset frame rate for us. And now we need a way to go ahead and get the frame rate. So we'll come back down here where we have our way to get our frame cap, and we'll just put that right on public get frame rate, or we could say FPS, but let's just say frame rate for now. So we'll return frame rate. And now we have a way to make sure we're actually hitting our frame rate every frame. And what we're going to do is the easiest way to tell. Right now we don't have our screen, so the way we can really tell right now is by putting it out to the screen. We can either use the logic update loop, or we can go ahead and invest logic in here, and I'll choose to put logic in here. So I'll go down here and we'll put a if statement. What we're going to do is we're going to add a debugging feature to our game engine. So we'll go back up to the top of our class real quick, and we'll make a private little flag here. And this flag will be called debugging. And this will store whether our game's in debug mode or not. And by default, we want to set debug mode. And by default, we're just going to go ahead and set debug mode equal to false. That way we don't accidentally run our game in debug mode unless we set it. Next, we want a way to get and tell if our game is actually in debug mode. So go ahead and add that as well. So we'll do is in debug mode. And we'll just return debug mode. That way, this is really a helpful method because we can tell from outside our game and also if our game's running. So we have things like cheat codes, we have that little frame counter in the bottom left hand screen. Our game running, we can tell. This is a really important feature to have in our game engine because that way we can also encapsulate other logic in our game based around this debug mode. So say we have things like cheat codes, we can skip levels and stuff like that when we're testing our game. We don't have to remove all that logic out of our game before we ship the game. We can leave all that logic there and just check if debug mode is enabled, then enable those features, otherwise disable it. So that's one way you can use it. It's also used for other things inside our engine, but that's just a little side note on that. So now let's go back down to our print statement we're going to make. We'll check if we are in debug mode, and let's go ahead and print out our new statistics we just had. So we'll just print out to the screen our FPS. So that way we can tell each frame what our FPS is. And we only want that to display during debug mode, and that should be good to go. Let's go ahead and run our game real quick. And we'll notice we're not getting that output because we're on debug mode enabled. We'll also go down to our game logic loop and we'll comment out this print line. We no longer need it to verify our game loop because we now have that. So go ahead and now enable, which we don't have a method for. So let's go ahead and add a method to enable the game debug feature. Enable debug mode. We'll take a variable that will just tell us whether we're going to turn this feature on or off. So now to go back to our game engine class. We can enable our game debug feature. And we'll set that equal to true. So now if we run our game, we'll see a little frame counter. We can verify now our frame rate, which is exactly what we want. But the problem with this is still even the frame counter, our FPS, isn't good enough to really track how well our game is performing. All it does is just verify we're actually running fast enough to hit our frame cap every second. And if not, it tells us we're running slower. But it doesn't tell us we're running faster if we have extra time to process more game input or do more difficult rendering. And that's where we really need our debug features. So what we're going to do, we're going to come back up here, and when we have our frame counter, I'm going to add one more counter, and we call this cycles. What cycles is, like I talked about earlier in the last episode, it's going to count the number of iterations we go through this while loop. So as soon as we get inside our while loop, we just go ahead and increment cycles, and like we did with the frames, we're just going to go ahead, and like what we did right here with frames, we're just going to go ahead and reset our cycles. And let's also print that out to the screen as well, just so we have some more additional debug features. And here's where you'll see what I'm talking about, how this idle thread makes a huge difference in performance. So if you run that, you'll see, like I said, that cycles is running around about 440 times per second, 450 times every second we're doing through this while loop. That 450 cycles is also including our 2 cycles of frame rate, whether it's at the 60 cycles, or what our frame rate, it's all included in that cycles. But what cycles also tells us, because we have all those extra time related iteration loops, it tells us essentially how fast our game really is running. And so if I had performance issues, we wouldn't see FPS drop until we hit below 2 cycles being processed. But cycles, as it goes through additional times, we can see this number slowly start to drop as we start adding more game logic, doing more complex rendering. So this allows us to see performance hits and how efficient our code is before we actually even start having problems with our frame rate. And that's why that's really important to have. So go ahead and stop that real quick. So now we verified that our metrics are correctly working and that our game is correctly running at 2 frames a second every single second. So there's not much more we have left to do. We are going to go back and we're going to add some more things real quick, because we do have this little flag right here that tells if our game is running or not. We don't have any way to tell outside of our engine if our game in fact is running, so let's go ahead and add that in. So we'll just come down here, probably before we get some more getters, so put this around the other getters, and we'll make this is running. This will tell our game if we're still running or not. And this is useful because now we have a way besides the engine knowing if the game is actually running or not. So we can access this inside our game class, we can access this outside from other programs. So this is really important to say, if we're running our game, launch our game from an outside source, we can check if the game isn't running. That means we obviously failed, we crashed for whatever reason, whatever the game isn't running. We can relaunch the game if we're running from a server, just different stuff like that. So we need to know if the game is running, so if we hit any issues, if we terminate successfully, and all that's going to tell us if the game is running or not. But what you will notice, we do have an issue here. But we'll fix that next time in our debugging issues. Actually, I'm back for one quick note, because we did go ahead and implement a way to go ahead and get our frame rate, but I forgot to actually go ahead and set that. So if we go back to our game loop real quick, and before we go ahead and reset everything, let's go ahead and set our frame rate equal to frames. And just to prove that we're actually doing that and we're getting the number back correctly, we're going to go ahead and turn debug mode off. And we come inside our game menu, and instead of printing out hello world, we'll print out the frame rate. So we did frame rate. And we'll go ahead and run that. And you'll see that we are putting out our frame rates correctly, like we should. And alright, that's all for now. Next episode, we'll go back into our programming and we will go talk about adding some error handling and exception throwing, because that's another part as far as programming our game engine, because right now we currently have no way to handle our game crashing, and that's going to be a big issue, especially when it comes to using our method we just created, our isRunning method, because right now you can see our game loop was to run and then crash for whatever reason. The only place we have running being set is here, so we'll need a way to fix that. And that's what we'll do in the next episode, as well as do some other small tweaks.